Up until now, we've been exploring ways that we can reduce the dynamic range of an audio signal by using compression and limiting. In this section, we'll be exploring the use of gates and expanders, which can increase the dynamic range of our audio signal. Gates and expanders work the opposite way of how compression works. Instead of reducing the volume of the audio signal that's above our threshold, a gate and expander reduce the volume of an audio signal that's below our threshold. But gates and expanders work a little bit differently than each other. Let's first take a look at a diagram of how our noise gate works. As an audio signal enters our noise gate, we set the level that the gate will detect our audio signal by using the threshold setting. Any audio that peaks above our threshold will cause the gate to open and let audio pass through. Once our signal dips below the threshold, the gate will close and it won't let any audio pass through. Our resulting audio is silent, but only in sections where the gate is closed. We don't have a ratio setting like on a compressor. Instead, we have what's called a range, which determines the volume of our audio signal when the gate is closed. So instead of having absolute silence when the gate is closed, if we increase our range, we can bring up the level of our audio when the gate is closed. There are many different things that we use gates for in both live and studio situations. One of the most common examples is to reduce the background noise of an audio track. Let's take this guitar track for instance, which has an audible hum that's coming through in the silent sections. So what we heard in this example was the hum in between the phrases of the guitar parts, but because our guitar signal was louder than the hum, we really didn't hear it during those phrases. And this is where a noise gate will come in handy. Let's go and insert our noise gate on the guitar track, go into our inserts, under dynamics, and insert our gate. Now just like our compressor plugin, we see some familiar controls. One for the threshold, we have attack, hold, and release with an auto button, and we have our analysis knob which tells the threshold at what audio level it's going to be detecting the audio at. And like our tube compressor, we also have a sidechain filter section. Let's go ahead and move our threshold down to -60, and we'll change our analysis from RMS to peak. We'll narrow in on this section that has the hum, and we'll take a look at our peak meters to get an idea of the level of the hum that's occurring. So we can see the level of our hum is sitting at -27.6 dB. In order for the gate to silence this noise, we have to raise the threshold to a value that's above -27.6. So we'll go ahead and play it back and slowly increase our threshold, and we'll start to notice that the gate cuts out the hum. So this time we could see once we increased our threshold past our original peak value, that the hum was no longer audible. So we're going to go ahead and bring our release down a little bit, and let's play the guitar track again to see what it's done to get rid of the hum. Now it's done a fairly good job at removing that noise. We still hear some of that noise in the tail ends of our phrases, and this is where our hold and release values come into play. If you remember from our compressor example, the hold value will tell the gate how long the gate will remain open after audio has exceeded the threshold. So we'll go ahead and move this to 0, and we'll decrease our release value. Now we'll go ahead and play it back and see if we've improved it. And just like our compressor, our attack tells us how long it's going to take before the gate opens after a transient has passed the threshold. Let's go ahead and see how the attack affects the gate. So you could see with longer attack values how the gate took longer to open once our signal passed the threshold. And if we take another quick look at our peak meters here, we can see that the guitar signal itself peaked at -6.8 dB. When setting our threshold, we have to make sure that it's above the limit of our noise, but below the peak value of our audio. Now let's look at our range knob to see how this affects the level of our audio. So this time we could see that by increasing our range, we actually increased the volume of the audio that was passed when the gate was closed. When using a gate to remove noise, most of the time you'll have the range set to its minimum value. Now let's take a quick peek at our sidechain filter section. Now just like our tube compressor, the sidechain filter tells the threshold at which frequencies it needs to be listening to. Since our hum is higher in frequency, we can tell the gate to ignore those frequencies and only focus on some of the lower frequencies of the guitar. In most cases, we can get a smoother effect and we'll be able to reduce our threshold even more. So we'll go ahead and click on the monitor button to listen to the sidechain filter frequency. And we'll try to start narrowing in on some of the lower frequencies of the guitar by using the center knob, which selects our frequency, and the Q factor, which sets the resonance for that filter. We'll go ahead and turn off our monitor button, and we'll go ahead and play it back again to see how we've been able to modify the detection circuit of the threshold. So you could see by telling the gate to only listen to the lower frequencies, we were able to get a smoother gate effect and reduce our threshold even further. In addition to the other controls, we also see that we have a state LED. The state LED tells us whether the gate is open, as indicated by green, closed, as indicated by red, and yellow, stating that it's in between. Now let's look at another example of gating in our rock session. Oftentimes when placing a mic on one drum in our drum set, we'll get bleed from the other drums through that microphone, but it can also make our tracks sound unpolished. Let's go ahead and play our kick drum and see what we got here. So we could hear some of the cymbals and the snare drum through our kick drum mic, and we can use a noise gate to remove those sounds. So on this track, we'll go ahead and insert our gate again. Go ahead and reduce our threshold to -60, and our analysis will change to peak. And we'll go ahead and play it back again and start setting our threshold. So the noise gate's done a great job at removing some of the bleed that was coming from the other drums. And by setting up the sidechain to monitor the lower frequencies of our kick drum, we can narrow in on it even further. Now let's go and move down to our snare track and we'll check out our expander plugin. Now our expander does act somewhat like a noise gate. However, it doesn't completely silence the audio, and its behavior mimics that of a compressor's in that we have a ratio value which tells our expander how much it's going to reduce the volume that's below our threshold. Now with this particular plugin, a little bit goes a long way. When we move our threshold all the way down to -60, there's no expansion happening. Let's go ahead and play it back and see what our snare sounds like without any expansion. Not only do we hear the bleed of the hi-hat, but we also have a lot of ringing that's going on after the stick hits the drum. We'll go ahead and set our ratio to 1 right now, and we'll bring our threshold up to a value of about -30. Let's go ahead and play it back and change some of the controls, and we'll see how it affects our audio. So you could hear just by adjusting a few settings, we were really able to get a drier sound out of our snare drum without affecting our overtones as much. Another unique gate plugin that we have is called the MIDI gate. Instead of using audio to gate a signal, it can use MIDI note data to gate a signal, which can give us an interesting way of creating unique stutter effects. If you remember our electronic track that we have here, we'll go and create a stutter effect for this bass synth. So we'll start by inserting the MIDI gate on our bass track. Now we'll need to create a MIDI track that contains some data that we can use to activate our gate. We'll go and right click and add a MIDI track. We'll label this MIDI trigger. And now we have to set the output for our MIDI trigger track to the input of this MIDI gate plugin that's on our bass synth. To do that, we come over here in our inspector, and on the output, we can select MIDI gate. We'll go ahead and create a segment of MIDI here. Now it doesn't matter which notes you choose, the gate will respond to any note data that's coming in. Go ahead and duplicate this. The first thing we'll do is change our hold mode to note on. That way the gate will open anytime it receives a note on signal. Let's go ahead and play it back. So you can see that just by adjusting a few settings, we can get some unique effects by using MIDI to open our gate. In the next section, we'll be taking a brief look at the envelope shaper tool, and finally we'll be moving on to a mix to see how we can use all of these dynamics plugins together.